Christmas has always been a special time for Mike and me. With our wedding taking place during the same season, we decided to spend our honeymoon in a cozy cabin in Vermont. The cabin was nestled deep in a snowy forest, just like the ones you see in Christmas movies. When we arrived, the cold air hit our faces, but the view of the cabin and the snow-covered trees was breathtaking. An elderly woman in a knitted hat stood by the cabin door. She introduced herself as the owner of the cabin and said everything was ready. Before leaving, she handed me a small box and said, "Oh, by the way, this is for you." When I opened the box, there was a small china doll inside. She was dressed in red and green clothes with long golden hair. Her glass eyes sparkled. It was strange to receive such a gift, but I smiled and thanked her. The woman quickly said goodbye and left. The cabin was warm and cozy. The fireplace was lit, and the smell of burning wood filled the air with a soothing aroma. I placed the doll on the mantelpiece above the fireplace and didn't think much of it. That night was perfect. We had a delicious dinner and sat under a blanket by the fire. But around midnight I woke up. I heard a rustling sound. I thought maybe it was Mike spinning, but when I looked at him, he was fast asleep. I thought maybe it was just the wind and closed my eyes again. The next morning, I saw Mike staring at the doll. His eyes were confused. I asked, "Is something wrong?" He said, "It wasn't." "What do you mean?" "Its arms. I remember them being down. But now, one arm is up." To be honest, I hadn't been paying close enough attention. I laughed and said, "You're probably imagining things." Maybe it was, and you just didn't notice last night. But there was something about Mike's expression that said he was sure. Everything was fine until the second night. I woke up again in the middle of the night, this time to what sounded like footsteps on a wooden floor. My heart was pounding. I whispered, "Mike, did you hear?" But he was asleep. I got up and turned on the light. No one was there. But when I looked at the doll, I felt it staring at me. Its eyes seemed almost real. A shiver ran down my spine. But I convinced myself that it was just my imagination. The next morning, Mike said, "This doll is weird. Let's get rid of it." "But why?" "I don't know. I just feel like it needs to go." I didn't argue. We put the doll in a plastic bag and took it into the woods. We left it there, feeling relieved as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders. But that night, just as we were getting ready for bed, there was a knock on the door. Mike grabbed his flashlight and went to check. When he opened the door, the plastic bag was sitting right there, right on the doorstep. The same bag we had left in the woods. Mike looked at me, his face pale. "Who brought this here?" I started to say, "Maybe an animal." He cut me off. "No, someone did it." He brought the doll back inside. This time we threw it into the fireplace. We watched as the flames engulfed it. The fire roared and the doll disappeared into the ashes. We thought it was over, but the next morning, the doll had returned intact and safe. We packed up and left the cabin. When we got back to town, the first thing we did was research the cabin's history. We learned that the previous owner was a little girl named Emily who had died in the cabin at Christmas many years ago. The doll was her last Christmas present. Mike suggested we take the doll to church. When we brought it there, the priest said, "It's not just a doll. There's something attached to it. We need to pray for it to be released." After the prayer, the doll was placed in a metal box and buried in the ground. We never heard from it again. But every time I think of Christmas, the doll's eyes roll in my mind. And I still don't know if it really was free or if it's still out there in the cold woods, waiting.